The last Sunday of September was unusually warm in Millstone, a quiet town tucked between dry hills and old oaks that had seen better days. In the far corner of town, just past the shuttered grain mill, stood a sagging wooden house with peeling white paint and a front porch that creaked louder than its owners ever spoke. Inside lived 9-year-old Ellie Parker, a girl with a quiet smile and the kind of sadness in her eyes that didn't come from scraped knees, but from something deeper, something that doesn't heal with time alone. 2 years ago, Ellie lost her mother in a late-night car crash on Route 19. Her mother had been working an extra shift at the diner to buy Ellie new winter boots. She never made it home. Since then, Ellie had lived with her grandmother, Marlene, once a combat medic, now a woman made of denim, calluses, and old pain. Dogs, dolls, and nonsense, Marlene would mutter, her voice rough like gravel. Life doesn't come with sugar. Best you learn early. But Ellie wasn't interested in sugar. What she wanted was something real, something that wouldn't disappear when the world got hard. That Sunday morning, Marlene took Ellie to the county shelter on the edge of town. The sign out front read, "Millstone Animal Control and Rescue," but the place felt more like a graveyard than a sanctuary. It was auction day, one of those grim events where animals that hadn't been adopted were sold off cheap. The ones nobody bid on? They didn't come back for the next round. "We're not buying anything," Marlene warned as they walked through the gates. "You'll look, you'll learn, and you'll walk out." Ellie nodded, but barely heard. Her eyes darted between the cages, past barking mutts and cats curled in corners, until she stopped cold. In the very last row, behind a dusty, half-bent cage, lay a dog unlike the others. He was a German shepherd, barely skin and bones, with a matted brown-gray coat streaked in dried blood. One of his back legs dragged uselessly behind him. He didn't bark or whimper, he didn't even lift his head. But his eyes, oh, his eyes, locked onto Ellie's, hollow and heavy like he'd seen too much and stopped expecting anything better. The shelter manager noticed her staring. "That one? Ain't worth your time, sweetheart. He don't move much, probably nerve damage. Tomorrow's his last day if no one takes him." Ellie didn't answer. Her heart had already decided. His name, she thought suddenly, is Rusty. She crouched down beside the cage, pushing her fingers gently through the bars. Rusty didn't flinch. He just laid there like someone who knew that kindness never lasted. Ellie's throat tightened. "He looks like how I felt," she whispered to herself. "After Mom." When Marlene caught up and saw which dog Ellie was fixated on, she frowned hard. "Absolutely not. You can't fix everything with sympathy, Ellie. He needs more help than you can give." Ellie didn't argue. She just reached into the front pocket of her hand-me-down jeans and pulled out 2 wrinkled $1 bills. Money she'd saved from collecting bottles and cans for the last 2 months. It had been meant for a plastic doll at the pharmacy, but suddenly the doll felt stupid. "I want to give him a second chance," she said simply. The shelter manager looked from Ellie to the old woman and shrugged. $2? That's less than scrap. He's yours, kid. Cage comes with." As they rolled the crate out, people stared. A few whispered, a couple snickered. "Why waste money on a crippled mutt?" someone muttered. Ellie didn't care. She kept her eyes forward, one hand resting against the cage. She could feel the heat from Rusty's body through the metal, could hear the uneven rhythm of his breath. And just as they reached the car, Rusty lifted his head for the first time. He touched his nose, just barely, to Ellie's finger. It was the softest thing she'd ever felt. That night after dinner, Ellie carried a bowl of warm water and an old towel out to the shed where Marlene had allowed her to keep Rusty. She cleaned his wounds slowly, whispering the whole time, telling him about her school, about her mom, about the dreams she didn't tell anyone else. She was brushing behind his ear when she noticed something strange. A thick patch of fur matted in an unnatural way. As she parted the hair, her fingers touched cloth. A small piece of worn, olive-colored fabric had been sewn beneath his fur, like someone had stitched it in long ago. Ellie fetched scissors and carefully snipped the threads, revealing a tarnished metal disc no bigger than a silver dollar. It was a locket, old and dented. Inside, a black and white photograph showed a woman in military uniform holding a baby. On the back was scratched lettering, nearly worn smooth with time. "Find my son, Bravo, bring him home." Ellie's breath caught in her throat. She looked at Rusty. He was watching her now, eyes no longer hollow. There was something in them, a question, maybe, or a memory. He laid his head on her lap, exhaling deeply, like he'd been holding in that breath for years. Ellie placed her hand over his heart. "I found you," she whispered. "Now we find the rest." The shed had always been just that. A place for rusted tools and dust-covered memories. But over the next few weeks it became something else entirely. Ellie swept out the cobwebs, laid down old blankets, and turned a busted floor lamp into a warm corner light. The moment Rusty limped through the door, it stopped being a shed and became a sanctuary. Every morning before school and every night before bed, Ellie would sneak out with a bowl of warm oatmeal or shredded chicken, whatever she could save from dinner, and sit with him. Rusty didn't eat much at first, and he barely moved, but his eyes followed her, and his ears twitched at her voice. Bit by bit, he began to trust her, and bit by bit, he began to come back to life. Beneath the harsh fluorescent lights of the school hallway, Ellie's classmates bragged about their smartphones, glitter shoes, and viral dance videos. But Ellie? She carried a paperback veterinary guide tucked in her backpack, borrowed from the local library. At lunch, while the others traded snacks and secrets, she sat with Toby, the only kid in class who loved silence more than sugar. Toby wore oversized glasses and knew things about computers that most adults didn't. He didn't talk much to anyone, except Ellie. "You're really doing this?" he asked one afternoon, staring at the old scratched locket Ellie had passed to him. She nodded. "I found it in his fur. It was sewn into a military patch like someone didn't want it to fall off. It has a name, Bravo." Toby adjusted his glasses and leaned in. Bravo is a military K-9 designation. If he's really from the service, there might be a record. I can search the missing K-9 units database, but it's old school, probably buried deep. Ellie smiled. "I don't care how long it takes." That evening, as the sun melted over the hills like spilled orange paint, Rusty let Ellie clean the wounds on his hind leg. He still winced, but didn't growl anymore. With Marlene's old wartime medical supplies and a cardboard splint she made with duct tape and determination, Ellie gently braced the leg. "You were a soldier, weren't you?" she whispered. "That's why you don't give up." Rusty blinked slowly in response. The next day, Toby pulled Ellie aside after class. "I think I found something," he said, handing her a printout. On it was a grainy photo of a German shepherd in military gear, same coloring, same eyes. Beside the photo, K-9 Unit Bravo, last seen during Operation Black Hollow. Handler, Sergeant Daniel Grayson. Status, missing in action. Below that, another line. Contact, Major Anna Grayson. Relation, mother. Ellie's fingers trembled as she traced the words. He's not just a stray, he's a hero. But it wasn't just records or photos that proved it. The proof came 2 days later, on a walk near the back trails of Millstone's forest line. Ellie and Rusty took short walks now, slow ones, but Rusty insisted, hobbling alongside her with stubborn pride. They were nearing an old creek when Rusty suddenly stopped. His entire body went rigid. Then, with a sharp bark, he lunged toward a patch of wild grass near the bank. "Rusty!" Ellie shouted, racing to catch up. He dug frantically, ignoring the pain in his leg until something clanked beneath the soil. Ellie knelt beside him, brushing dirt aside with her bare hands. Her breath caught when she saw the rusted tail of an old mortar shell peeking from the ground. They backed away, and Ellie used her school-issued tablet to call the sheriff. Within the hour, police and bomb disposal units had cordoned off the area. The next morning, the local news was buzzing. 9-year-old and injured dog discover live explosive in forest. The headlines were loud, but what shook the town even more was the footage captured by an officer's body cam of a wounded dog, barely able to stand, placing himself between Ellie and danger. Marlene stared at the television that night, quiet for once. "That dog," she murmured. More to herself than to Ellie, he knew exactly what he was doing. Ellie looked up from Rusty's side, her hand resting gently over his chest. "I think he's remembering who he used to be." Marlene didn't answer, but later that night she left a new blanket and a real dog bowl beside Rusty's bed in the shed. She didn't say a word about it the next morning, but Ellie noticed. In the days that followed, people from town started paying attention. Sheriff Mendez stopped by to drop off special dog food and medical tape. Mrs. Florence from the bakery left warm cornbread at their porch. Even kids at school whispered about the war dog who saved the girl. But Ellie knew this wasn't just some miracle rescue story. This wasn't luck. Rusty wasn't just healing, he was remembering. And with every memory, Ellie felt something rising inside her too. A voice she hadn't used in years. A strength she thought had died with her mother. Late one night, as wind rustled the trees outside, Ellie sat beside Rusty and opened the locket again. She stared at the image of the woman and her baby boy. Her fingers touched the etched words once more. "Find my son. Bravo. Bring him home." "I don't know what home means for you anymore," Ellie whispered. "But maybe we can find it together." Rusty rested his head against her arm, a quiet hum in his throat like agreement. And for the first time since her world had fallen apart, Ellie felt something unfamiliar bloom in her chest. Hope. The rain arrived one Monday morning without warning, painting the streets of Millstone in shades of gray. Ellie stood by the window with her forehead against the cold glass, watching droplets race each other down the pane. Rusty lay behind her on an old rug, his eyes closed but ears perked, always alert. He'd been improving, walking more, responding faster. The limp was still there, but Ellie could tell he was getting stronger. Like a flame catching onto dry wood, his instincts were reigniting. But the knock at the door that morning changed everything. It was sharp, calculated. Not like the friendly tap of a neighbor or the uncertain knock of someone selling cookies. Marlene opened it, her expression stiffening immediately. The man standing outside wore a black suit, pressed and dry despite the drizzle. His shoes shined too much for Millstone. His ID badge hung from a clipped lanyard, but the name wasn't what caught Ellie's attention. It was the way Rusty reacted. He didn't bark, he growled, low, dangerous, deep from the chest. The man didn't flinch. "Apologies, I'm Mr. Blake. I'm with a special division of the Department of Defense. I believe you have a dog here that might belong to us." Marlene narrowed her eyes. "We didn't report any lost government property." "No, but we were alerted by a database flag," Blake replied smoothly. "There's a K9, military grade, believed to be in your possession." "Bravo?" Ellie's heart stuttered. Blake held out a folder, flipping it open to reveal printed documents, certificates, serial numbers, photos of Bravo from years ago. One even had a paw print. It's very important that this animal is returned, for national security reasons. Rusty stepped in front of Ellie and Marlene then, his head low, his body angled protectively. His growl rumbled louder. "I don't think he likes you," Ellie said softly. Blake smirked, but his eyes didn't smile. "He's just confused. Trauma does that. But this dog is federal property. I'll return tomorrow with proper transport." Marlene closed the door in his face without a word. That night, Ellie sat curled on the floor next to Rusty, brushing the ruff of fur behind his ears. "What are you not telling us?" she whispered. Rusty licked her hand once, then lay down with a thud. He didn't sleep much. Neither did she. The next morning, Marlene called someone she hadn't spoken to in 20 years. Retired Lieutenant Colonel Henry Wilson answered on the second ring. His voice still had a sharp edge. "Grayson's boy?" he said when Marlene told him about Bravo. "Grayson's mother," Marlene corrected. "Anna, the one who filed the lost dog report years ago. She claimed he never died, that the dog survived the blast and was carrying something." There was silence, then a long exhale. The mission went sideways. Some of us always suspected there was a leak. Bravo was the only one unaccounted for after it all went up in smoke. If he's still alive, he might know more than anyone. Ellie overheard it all. She didn't understand every detail, but she knew enough. Someone in the military had betrayed their team, and someone, Rusty, had escaped with the truth. When she got to school, she found Toby in the computer lab. "Can you look into a guy named Blake?" she asked. Toby blinked. "Blake, what?" "That's all I've got, just start with defense contractors or military procurement." He didn't ask why, he just started typing. Meanwhile, back at home, things were already shifting. That evening, as Ellie carried fresh water to the shed, she noticed something strange. The latch on the side window was unhooked. It had been locked the night before. Her heart thudded. Rusty stood stiffly in the shadows, tail raised, ears back. When she stepped closer, she saw scratch marks on the wooden window frame, fresh ones, deep. Someone had tried to get in. "Bah-hoy!" Ellie screamed, running inside. Marlene came barreling out with her old shotgun clutched in both hands. "Back inside," she ordered, voice low but steel hard. That night, they didn't sleep in the house. They slept together in the living room, with Rusty curled beside Ellie and Marlene in the armchair, shotgun across her lap. The next day, Toby called. "You were right," he said, his voice tense. "Blake used to be part of a logistics unit overseeing weapons shipments, but he resigned right after Operation Black Hollow. No fanfare, no pension, just disappeared from the record." "What if he's the one who betrayed Bravo's unit?" Ellie asked. "I think he's trying to erase the last witness." That evening, Ellie pulled out the worn locket again. She held it in both hands, her thumbs brushing the photo. She looked at Rusty, curled up but wide awake, watching her every move. "We're going to stop him," she whispered. "We're going to tell the truth." She tucked the locket into a box beside her bed, then stood up and kissed Rusty's head. He licked her cheek and let out a soft chuff, almost like a laugh. Outside, lightning flickered across the hills, and the storm that had been brewing for days finally began to break. But inside that small old house in Millstone, 3 souls, an old woman, a brave girl, and a wounded dog, prepared for the fight of their lives. The sky was bruised purple when Mr. Blake returned. He didn't knock this time. Instead, 3 black SUVs pulled up just after sunset, tires crunching over the gravel driveway like bones under boot. Ellie was watching from the window, her stomach in knots. Rusty stood beside her, muscles tensed, a low growl vibrating through his chest. From the lead vehicle stepped Blake, this time wearing a long coat and dark gloves. But what chilled Ellie most wasn't the man. It was who walked beside him. Sheriff Darren Rooks. He was a tall man with a belly built on coffee and donuts, the kind of sheriff who cared more about keeping things quiet than keeping them right. And tonight, he wasn't quiet. He was angry. "Ellie, open the door," he called, pounding once. "We've got reason to believe the dog inside is part of an active military investigation. Step aside, sweetheart." Marlene opened the door but didn't move aside. Her spine was straight, and her voice cold as steel. "You have a warrant?" Blake stepped forward, waving a document that looked official enough. "Signed by the county judge," he said smoothly. "We're not here to arrest anyone, just to retrieve military property." Rusty stood in the hallway behind them, body blocking Ellie's legs. His eyes didn't leave Blake. "You'll have to go through him first," Ellie said, her voice shaking. "And me." Sheriff Rooks sighed. "Look, this doesn't have to get ugly." But before another word could be spoken, Rusty turned sharply and bolted out the back door, his ears twitching towards something unseen. "Rusty!" Ellie shouted, chasing after him barefoot into the yard. Marlene cursed under her breath and followed, shotgun in hand. Rusty raced toward the back of the property, toward the tree line beyond the shed, where a mossy stump had sat undisturbed for years. But now he was digging like a mad dog, claws ripping into the soil, nose snorting through the dirt. "What is he?" Marlene started, but then Ellie dropped to her knees beside him and began to help. Beneath the mud and roots, they uncovered something strange. An old leather strap, sealed tight with twine, wrapped around a metal tin. Ellie pried it open. Inside were three things: a military dog tag, scratched but legible, Bravo 0923, a tiny USB drive tucked in wax paper, a faded photograph of a special forces team, one of whom was Daniel Grayson, Rusty's original handler. They all looked young, brave, alive, until you looked at the background, because standing behind them, face half turned away but unmistakable, was Blake. Ellie's breath caught. He was there, he was one of them. Rusty whined softly, nudging the photo with his nose. Marlene looked from the drive to the girl, then to the dog. "We need to plug this in, now." They didn't go back to the house, not with Blake and the sheriff waiting. Instead, they ran to the shed. Toby was already there, having snuck over after Ellie's urgent text. He had his laptop open and ready. The USB slid in with a soft click. For a moment, nothing happened, just static. Then a voice crackled through the speakers, a man's voice, calm, focused. It was Sergeant Daniel Grayson. "Bravo's cam is active, audio clean, operation commencing." There was gunfire, shouting, movement, then contact. "Blake's down. Wait, no, he's..." Silence. And then Blake's voice, unmistakably cold. "Guns delivered. Data retrieved. The rest? Collateral. And if that mutt's still alive, terminate." Toby's hands trembled over the keyboard. "He set them up," he whispered. "Blake sold them out." Marlene turned to Ellie. "We take this straight to the state authorities. Not a word to the local sheriff. He's compromised." But they never got the chance. Outside, Blake had noticed the missing dog, the back door swinging, the footprints in the dirt. He barked an order. "Find them." Lights flicked on. Boots pounded the ground. Rusty barked once, a sharp command. Then the chase began. Ellie clutched the USB as Rusty led her down the ravine behind the shed, ducking into an old foxhole covered by pine boughs. They crouched together as heavy boots passed inches away. "Ellie?" Blake's voice rang out. "I don't want to hurt you, but you got something that doesn't belong to you." Rusty shifted beside her, eyes locked on the shadows. Then, without warning, Blake appeared, his face twisted with fury, a flashlight beam landing squarely on Ellie's face. "I said, hand it over." Ellie stood, fists clenched around the USB. "You killed them. You lied. You left Rusty for dead." Blake stepped forward, hand reaching for his belt. But before he could touch anything, Rusty lunged. It wasn't elegant or graceful, but it was powerful. He slammed into Blake's chest, knocking the man backward and pinning him into the mud. The flashlight flew, landing beside a tree. Blake struggled, but Rusty didn't move, teeth bared an inch from his throat. Sheriff Rooks arrived seconds later, gun drawn, until Marlene came up behind him, cocking her own shotgun. "Go ahead, Darren. Pull the trigger. I dare you." By morning, state police had taken over. Blake was arrested on federal charges, espionage, conspiracy, and attempted obstruction. The recording on the USB was enough to reopen every file on Operation Black Hollow. Rusty was officially identified by a military veterinarian as K9 Bravo. His leg injuries matched reports from the explosion. Scars, DNA, even his chipped tooth, all matched. But the government didn't take him back, because one little girl had already claimed him, with $2, a whisper, and a promise. As Ellie walked Rusty up the steps of their porch that evening, she paused to look out at the hills. She didn't feel small anymore. She felt brave. The following weeks unfolded like the gentle thaw after a long winter. Millstone, a town that had once looked at Ellie Parker as the girl with too many questions and not enough words, now looked at her with something closer to awe. The news spread fast about the brave girl who uncovered a buried conspiracy and the crippled dog who turned out to be a decorated war hero. But Ellie didn't care for headlines. She cared that Rusty, no, Bravo, was finally sleeping through the night without flinching at every noise. She cared that when she brushed behind his ear, his tail thumped against the floor. And she cared most of all that he was safe and home. It wasn't long before the state held a press conference. Ellie, in a dress she hadn't worn since her mother's funeral, stood awkwardly beside Marlene in front of a crowd of cameras and strangers. Rusty sat at her side, posture proud despite the brace on his leg. The sun glinted off his military medal, now polished and pinned gently to a new harness. A woman stepped onto the stage. A woman with silver-streaked hair, sharp eyes, and a trembling smile. Major Anna Grayson. She didn't speak right away. She just knelt beside Rusty, her hands shaking as she touched his face. "Bravo," she whispered. "You made it." Rusty nuzzled into her hand, eyes half-lidded, tail swaying once. "I never stopped believing you were alive," Anna said softly, loud enough for the microphones to catch. "And I never stopped praying that someone kind would find you." Her eyes shifted to Ellie. "Thank you for bringing him back." Ellie didn't know what to say. She just nodded, and for the first time since her mom's death, let herself cry in front of everyone. Later that afternoon, Anna Grayson visited the house in Millstone. Over sweet tea and silence, she watched as Ellie played fetch with Bravo in the backyard. The limp didn't stop him now. He moved slower, sure, but he moved with purpose. "I'd take him home," Anna said, "but I think he's already found it." Marlene nodded. "He chose her the moment she paid $2 for a broken soul." Anna smiled. "Then I'd like to help them build something for others." And that's how the Bravo Center for Healing was born. It started as a modest idea, just an unused barn behind Marlene's property, some fencing, a few hay bales. But word spread quickly. Donations rolled in, volunteers signed up. Ellie became the face of the project. A girl who once lost everything, now helping others find their way back. The center welcomed abandoned dogs, retired canines, and even rescue horses. But more than that, it welcomed kids. Those dealing with grief, trauma, or simply loneliness. Ellie worked with each child herself, teaching them how to build trust with animals the way she had with Bravo. "He teaches you patience," Ellie would say. "He teaches you to listen without needing words." One day, as summer approached, a boy named Lucas arrived. He was 10, didn't speak, and wouldn't meet anyone's eyes. Ellie paired him with Bravo. At first, they sat in silence. Days passed. Then one morning, Ellie found Lucas curled up beside Bravo in the grass, whispering something into his ear. It wasn't much, just a few broken words, but it was a beginning. That night, Ellie sat on the porch, her feet swinging off the edge. Marlene handed her a steaming mug of cocoa, more marshmallow than drink. "You've changed, kid," she said gruffly. Ellie looked down at the mug. "So have you." Marlene chuckled. "Maybe we're both healing." Bravo trotted up the steps, dropped a stick at Ellie's feet, and rested his chin on her knee. The sunset cast a golden light over his coat, highlighting every scar, every mark, each one a chapter in his story. She ran her fingers through his fur, brushing past the spot where she'd once found a sewn-in locket. It was gone now, given to Anna. But the message etched in Ellie's heart would never fade. "Find my son, Bravo, bring him home." She had, and in doing so she'd found herself too. Later that night, Ellie curled beside Bravo on the porch swing. Crickets hummed in the distance. Fireflies blinked lazily under the stars. "People think I saved you," she murmured into his fur. "But really, you saved me first." He licked her cheek, then closed his eyes with a contented sigh. And in the quiet of that warm summer night, with her best friend beside her and a future full of hope ahead, Ellie Parker finally let go of the past. She hadn't just found a dog, she'd found a miracle.